Welcome back to the King's Country Devlog series. Although I'm not sure I should keep referring to this series as King's Country because we have a new name. Grove Keeper. This is an homage to one of the main inspirations for the game, Dungeon Keeper, as well as representing what the player does in the game more accurately. Since the early days of this devlog, I've had people mention the name doesn't exactly match the setting or themes of the game. There have been some major changes to the game since the last video. I have totally transformed the game design to create a more satisfying loop. In the previous version, the waves of enemies were based off time intervals, so enemies would spawn in for 1 minute, and then the player would get a break for 4 minutes. The problem with this was that sometimes not all the enemies in the wave would be killed before the next wave began, and the waves blurred together. There was no real way to differentiate these stages. So in this new iteration, the player chooses when to start the next round by pressing this button. Then, when all the enemies have been killed, the round ends and the player is rewarded with a choice of 2 upgrades. These upgrades used to be purchased at any time through a menu, but by giving them to the player as a reward, the player is more inclined to use them. I found that when people would play the previous version, quite often they didn't bother with the upgrades, and only when they had established a solid economy, they would just buy all the upgrades at once. The other thing that has changed is the way Magen is procured by the player. Previously, trees would produce Magen over time based on their distance from other trees. Now trees only produce Magen at the end of each wave, 1 Magen for each tree. Because of this, I have altered the value of Magen, so instead of an Orcus costing 150 Magen, now it costs 4. What this means is that there are now more important choices to make, especially in the early game. You have to weigh up the benefits of investing in Magen producing trees versus building an army but getting less Magen in the next round. There is also a random chance that a killed enemy will drop a Magen point that is collected at the end of the wave. This has drastically increased the amount of strategy involved. I have also created a new claimable site. So we already have the Horger, where the player could purchase a Skesser unit or the Huldra unit. Now we have the Witch's Hut. It functions in a very similar way to the Horger, except only the Hunter units attempt to claim the Witch's Hut. I changed it so the Skesser is now spawned from the hut, as well as a new unit, the Goblin Archer. This is a powerful ranged unit that shoots arrows from a distance. One of the gameplay situations that has emerged from this new game design is that when the enemies have stopped spawning, there are quite often remaining units at the claimable sites, so in order to progress to the next wave, the player needs to assault the site with whatever units they have left. This was sometimes too difficult if the player only had a few low-level units and no Magen. So a solution to this problem is the player can collect Magen dropped by enemies before the end of the wave, if the only enemies remaining are defending the Horger or the hut. This gives the player a little help in completing the wave. I found the game needed some new enemy units to put more pressure on the player and add some random events to the waves. One of the ideas which has been implemented is the Spy enemy. This is a stealth enemy that appears randomly at different intervals based on what wave the player is up to. They sneak at high speeds and head straight for the home tree to destroy it, ignoring any units or trees along the way. They're basically assault units that are designed to encourage the player to protect their home tree and not to focus all of their forces on the front lines. The Spy can spawn at any time, including in between waves, so the player can never be too comfortable. The other thing you might have noticed is the size of the map is much smaller. It's 1/4 the size of the previous maps. This has created a much more intimate experience and more skirmish-like combat. The player doesn't have to wait for as long for the enemies to arrive. Oh, and I've added the ability to speed up and slow down time. So lots has been happening at Billy Green Games over the last few weeks. I think the new changes are a big step in the right direction. Slowly but surely we're discovering what this game wants to be. If you've enjoyed this video or the series so far, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It would really help me out. Thanks so much for watching, look after each other and enjoy the rest of your day.